The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's webinar entitled From Facilities Health to Institutional Success, Putting State of Facilities Strategies into Action. My name is Billy Zadig, Manager Special Projects for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA webpage later this afternoon. You will receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days with a link to the webpage where all webinar recordings are housed, as well as a link to our upcoming webinar. We will close out the 2021 webinar season with our webinar tomorrow on November 17th. We will pick back up in mid-February 2022. Professional Continuing Education and AIA-CLU credits are being offered for today's program. If you are an AIA professional requiring your certificate, please send an email to me at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @APA.org, along with your AIA membership number if you have not done so in the past. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of our presenters. If you're just calling in, make sure you send an email to me at billie@apa.org so I can send you a certificate if you requested one. The system only recognizes you if you log in. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Pete Zara. I will rejoin you for the Q&A session later. Pete, take it away.
Thank you, Billie. It's great to be here. I'm delighted to be here with my two colleagues, Clint and Alette. We'll let them introduce themselves in a second. It's fantastic to be talking in a new way today about the ideas in this year's State of Facilities in higher education, and it's a real privilege to be joined by so many of you here today. A little bit of housekeeping. I want to make sure that anybody who does know about Gordian, that Gordian helps facilities and finance leaders better steward campuses across the full building life cycle. And our ultimate goal is to bring data and technology to bear on enabling the best possible decisions, maximizing value in service of mission at your organizations. Today, we're going to lean heavily on the work of our facilities planning team, who does much of the data work inside facilities, inside the state of higher education, state of facilities and higher education, apologies. And we pay special attention to the intersection in that work, in the intersection of space, capital, and operation silos. Today's conversation will involve a little bit of a re-examination of some of the elements of that State of Facilities document and spend most of our time on peer insight from the practical application of those strategies in the document. And we will, of course, finish with a little parting wisdom and some time for your audience questions. All of this conversation is rooted in the State of Facilities and Higher Education, which we assembled this year with Lander Medlin and the team from APA. If you haven't seen it, you can find it on websites for APA or Gordian. One significant highlight of the report is the notion that facilities leaders over the past 18 months found themselves more essential than ever, literally leading the conversation at times. Today's conversation is intended to reinforce that idea and the sense that you should feel empowered to use this moment in time to animate and activate change on your campus for the better, and for communities that, frankly, we all know need to keep evolving. We're going to focus today on some of the recommended strategies and hear from these two colleagues about what they're actually doing and to work on moving their communities forward. So back to those two colleagues, let's let them introduce themselves. Clint, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about Yavapai?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clint Ewell. I am the Vice President of Finance and Administrative Services here at Yavapai College. We're a two-year school based in Prescott, Arizona, but with 5 other locations throughout Yavapai County. And I guess the couple things I'd like to highlight are that you see our footsie about 3,900, but because so many of our students are part-time, we're really servicing about 10,000 students per year. And I also wanted to highlight the size of our service district is over 8,000 square miles. And just to put that in perspective, that means we're larger than Delaware, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And New Jersey's probably looking over its shoulder because it hears our footsteps. So It's a big service district with 6 locations. And the other thing I'll highlight is that, we are a comprehensive community college, but almost half of our portfolio are career tech ed programs, everything from, traditional ag and auto and healthcare programs to some unique things here that our community needs, such as culinary, police academy, and even 3D construction. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lalit.
Thank you, Clint. Hi, everyone. My name is Lalit Agarwal. I work in the University of Nebraska-Lincoln as the Executive Director for University Operations. First, I want to thank Pete and Gordian Group and APA to invite me to participate in this webinar. Some of you who are not familiar with the University of Nebraska campus, we are one of the 4 Nebraska University campuses located in Lincoln. UNL happens to be the flagship institution of the state system. We have about 23,000 students, 5,000 faculty and staff, about 6.5 million square feet of occupied space. Overall, we have programs for all disciplines except for having a hospital on our campus, but we are a very high research and science campus. And that, I'll give it back to you, Pete.
Fantastic. I'm going to take the mic here for a little while and just do a little bit of that background work so then we can set up the conversation that hopefully the 3 of us will have together. This image has been bouncing around for a while. It's one of Lander Medlin's favorites because it has no numbers on it, so she thinks that's hilarious given it's a Gordian kind of image. But it was helped created by Brian Harvey, who worked with us on the previous year's State of Facilities. And in it, we're helping to point out a couple of really big trends that are going on right now. Certainly that we all expect enrollment to peak in the middle of this decade. We've been expecting that for a little while now. And with that, there will be a net revenue drop at some point, depending. There's never been a place that isn't really affected by student enrollment to address revenue. That will lead to a reduction in facility spending because I don't know of a time when revenue didn't drop that some facility spending wasn't compromised. And that leaves the only thing still continuing is that inevitable need and that inevitable demand on facilities going forward. And we thought before going into the pandemic that this might be accelerated, and boy, has everybody experienced that over the last 18 months. There's not a single school that really didn't get some taste of a good piece of this curve hitting their operating and capital reality. Inside the State of Facilities, we highlighted these 4 major drivers of institutional change. And I'm not going to get into detail on them, but I want to call out a couple things about them. Certainly the economic, social, and environmental reckoning that's been happening over the last several years is the kind of conversation we expect to see in college campuses. It's what college and universities have always been about, is that kind of active dialogue about what should or should not be the shape of the future. And so it's certainly no surprise that those conversations have wandered on campus even through the middle of this pandemic and are going to be driving very different ways in which you're thinking about operating and occupying physical properties that you have. The evolution of student experience has been something we've all been kind of undergoing for decades now, and it continues, right? New demands, new expectations, new understandings of what a college education is about, what it's for, what the outcomes are. All of that is very much an element of an evolving student experience that each of us is getting to deal with when working on and around campuses. Demographic changes was not just about that enrollment cliff, right? It wasn't just the cliff. That's not the only demographic issue of sheer numbers. Racial and cultural differences, gender issues, a whole host of other identity changes going on in the demographic mix of students on campuses across the country as the population of our nation changes and evolves, is going to affect the way in which you're teaching, who you're teaching, and how you're teaching things that are there. And that ultimately results in pressures on the way in which the facilities address that. There's also a demographic issue that has to do with internationalism and the fact that we've been relying for a very long time on international students, and that has been under some severe pressure over the last several years with the pandemic, but it's also under pressure because globally there are changes in evolving and developing stronger and stronger academic experiences at schools outside of this country, and that will continue to create pressure on the number of students who are really interested and willing to travel to this country and pay, quite frankly, the rates that we're charging. And we shouldn't forget about adult learners and the interesting shifting dynamic of adult learners that has been an important part of the demographic picture over the last several decades. And finally, the pandemic is forcing us to confront the shifts in the very nature of community. The notion of virtual and hybrid learning, the possibility of learning far from campus, the part-time experiences that Clint referenced early on, the multi-campus experience that systems offer now may change the way in which schools are offering programs. The whole notion of gathering, right? We're rediscovering what it means to gather this fall in football stadiums around the country and on quads, but we're rethinking what it means to be together. And if people aren't working on campus, how do you bring people together? There's a whole host of issues, all of which continue to translate into questions about what it means to be a part of a community. So that led us to these 4 strategies. We're going to talk about them today. We're going to explore them with these guys asking not the question, how do I get more money, but how do I reimagine what's happening on campus and how do I confront what's going on at these schools? So let me, Cliff, let's finally bring you back into the conversation. Thanks for your patience. You're working on some activities on campuses that cross over with all of these strategies, and I know I'm eager to hear your thoughts. So I just want to jump right in. The first around space, the strategy. It's the strategy that's really on everybody's mind as we think about this new virtual environment. And you know, it's been there really since we all went remote in 2020. I know people thought education was immune to change, but we changed like the Dickens in about 2 weeks, and we're not looking back clearly. Life in the virtual world's radically altered our perceptions of space and how or even when space should be used. This webinar, case in point. So I want to ask you two to talk a little bit about the ways you're thinking about space utilization moving forward, and some of the steps you're taking to understand or even optimize it. And maybe Lilette, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Sure, thanks, Pete. In the end, the first thing that we always think about is you can't manage what you don't measure. So one of the things that we have always done is we have partnered with Gordian and tried to find a way to measure what our space usage has been and compare it to our peers. So what you see on the screen right now, it shows Nebraska compared to our Big Ten average peers and our research peers. So from a density factor point of view, Nebraska is actually one of the most sparse campuses, but from a tech rating point of view, number of sensors we have in our occupied spaces, we are the highest in the tech rating. And then we also see that we have somewhere in the middle when it comes to how many buildings we have per million gross square feet. And what this does, it gives us a bird's eye view of what is our campus's built infrastructure. And then we want to also understand it's not just what it is, but what kind of spaces we have, what era of construction that we are inheriting from when the buildings were built. And as we all know, the pre-war era, the buildings were built with more durable construction, but post-war, the quality was not as high. And then now we are looking into this complex building scenarios. And if you see the building average of when the nationwide higher education campuses were built, Nebraska's path follows very closely with what the national average is. And that gives us a little bit of a pause because we are standing right now in 2021 and going back and looking at our age of our buildings, we see that in next few years, we're going to be looking at some significant investment needed in our buildings. We have over the past few years done a good job of trying to find operational efficiencies, energy efficiencies, and reinvest them in our existing infrastructure, by which what we have done is we have reduced the age of our building portfolio quite a bit, especially compared to our Big Ten peers. We have made a significant dent where if we had not done that, our buildings on average would be 57 years old. But because of the renovations and investments we've made, we've brought that age down to 36 years on average. But as we look forward, if nothing is done, that's going to still continue to hurt us. That's one of the charts that Pete showed earlier, is the investment need for facilities is going to keep rising. and we're going to have to be creative, whether it is going to be hybrid mode, whether we figure out conversations with our deans and directors in terms of space optimization. If the functional use of the building is lagging the required investment in that building, then having those conversations to see if we need to actually reduce our footprint on our campus. So those are the conversations that are starting to form. And to Pete's point earlier, we finally have a seat at the table. And that advantage that we've gained over the last 18 months gives us a perfect opportunity to make sure that we have those conversations with the people that finally are understanding that what facilities does is not just all behind the walls, but we have a significant impact on their success of their student programs and their research programs.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Clint, I think your challenges, they're different, right? As a two-year institution with a kind of a different sort of setting. And maybe you can't necessarily speak for all the sort of two-year institutions, but certainly you're more typical of those. I guess I'm wondering if you can talk about what's happening there and how you're addressing those challenges going forward, and maybe counter a little bit what you're seeing where you are versus what Willette was just talking about.
Sure. So as most of you probably know, community colleges tend to be countercyclical. So as the economy improves and people go back to work, they leave the community college. And that's a phenomenon that's somewhat unique to community colleges as compared to our four-year sisters. So, if we look at our density on campus, how much our buildings are being used, clearly there's a downward trend. We've gone down 12 or 15% over the past decade as we've gone through this phenomenal period of growth. But part of that is not only people going back to work, it's been people changing how they choose to attend our courses. So we have literally twice as many classes happening in high schools around our service district than we did 10 years ago. And prior to the pandemic, not after the pandemic, but prior to the pandemic in 2020, our online enrollments had grown to over 40%. So those three things kind of combined to create the graph that you see in front of you, which has led us to take certain actions, one of which is try to renovate existing space into things we need versus building new space, because clearly we don't have a need for new space. So over the past decade, we have gotten rid of probably about 10% of our classrooms, but we've added about 20% lab space. We've also added more space for student engagement and student activities and student support services, things that are going to help us with retention and completion. So the only other thing I'll add is that we're updating our campus master plan as we speak. Given the phenomenal changes that have happened in the last year and a half, we think there are more changes to come. And as Sightlines pointed out in their State of Facilities report, I do think all of our futures will include more non-traditional students. So again, do we have the right kinds of facilities and services to support those students, or is too much of it geared toward the traditional age group that's really a shrinking portion of all of our portfolios?
It's really interesting. You're epitomizing in this image the kind of dynamic that we're talking about, where more students may enter campus, but because of the changing way in which we engage the campus, the amount of space we're using is changing, right? And you're both, I think, experiencing that pressure on research space, that science space, that lab space, right? I mean, you talked about it being such an intense research environment. I don't forget what the statistic is there, but just a tremendous amount of space is tied up in research, which is not necessarily typically very dense space. It is by its very nature open, right? I mean,
yeah, it was actually one of the metrics when we first saw it from a different perspective. 42% of our space on our campus is science and research. If somebody would have asked me before I saw that statistic, I would have guessed maybe 20-25%, because we are still predominantly an undergraduate typical undergraduate program, but 42% of the space being science and research was a little bit of an eye-opener for us. But that puts things into perspective, because over the last few years, to Clint's point, we are increasing our square footage from a traditional classroom into more either a lab space, a science space, a research space, or from a student experience point of view, we are switching over to the learning commons and where people can have the college experience rather than just a classroom learning experience.
It's really interesting to try to understand where we're going in terms of what spaces are vital, what spaces are not vital, and how much you want to put in. We've all joked about experiential spaces have been created over the last 20 or 30 years that some people would think of as amenities, but they may be really essential to the student experience and the learning experience above and beyond the classroom. Anytime you talk about space, it's going to lead to a conversation about investment, right? And I kind of want to move to the second topic, because how you're investing your dollars, you guys are talking about this right now, I mean, is at least as important as the total pool of resources you have at play. I would like to ask you both about steps you're taking to make sure that you're confident in the investment choices you're making today or in the future. Clint, I wonder if you can take the lead on this one, maybe share some of the ways in which you're talking to leadership there at Yavapai to make sure that they're aligned and kind of a common mind about how and when the resources are being invested, right? It's hard to get a picture from that density picture, whether you guys have more money or less money or the same amount of money, but I know it's tight, right? So, I mean, how are you talking to them and how are you communicating to them your priorities for space investment?
Right, no, that's a really good point. I think the language we use and making sure that we're all looking at the same metrics become increasingly important as there are fewer resources. So, if we all have our own set of values and our own set of metrics, we're all going to be lobbying for different things. But what we've really tried to settle on over the past decade is a concept called net asset value. And we work with that concept both internally within the institution as well as with our board. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, and this is from a finance guy, so forgive me if I butcher this, Pete, but essentially it's a measure of how like new your buildings are. So it does a 10-year outlook at how many repairs would be needed to bring that building up to like new status, and it creates a ratio, and the higher the ratio, the better the condition of the building. And so what you can see in looking at our portfolio of buildings is everything from our very best on the top left to our very worst on the bottom right. And we assess that by physically going out and inspecting all of our building systems, whether it's the interior shell, the exterior shell, the roofing, the HVAC system, electrical, plumbing. We've looked at it all. And from there, it makes the conversation a little simpler. I mean, it's pretty obvious that in the scheme of things, we probably need to invest in that bottom right corner, building 54, before we reinvest in building 23. And we've put a lot of time and effort in trying to get our board up to speed on these concepts and on the value of planned maintenance so that they will allocate on an annual basis budget money to reinvest in these important assets. So I think the other one that might be worth talking about is the progress that you can make over time. I mean, this isn't something that's going to get fixed overnight, but by working with our board and showing them our plan, we've gotten them to commit to about $4 million of annual reinvestment, which has allowed us, as you can see, to work our way up from being slightly below average on the condition of our facilities to now being one of the top performing institutions in terms of the condition of our facilities. And part of the secret of that for us has been, as we've gone through and done these renovations to convert space into the kinds of space we need to be more successful, we have also done planned maintenance.
Very cool. Yeah, the longitudinal thing, right? It's such a hard thing to get your hands around, how to sustain progress, how to keep things moving forward, how to keep everybody involved in the conversation over a period of time, particularly as faces change, right? Maybe on the facilities and finance teams, but also on the board and the leadership, right? To kind of create metrics that everybody can buy into on a regular basis. Lilette, when we talked about this before. You had some kind of interesting, different ways to think about it, right? That were at a different scale, maybe in terms of where you were focusing some of the thoughts. I thought those were really interesting. If you want to maybe share some of those.
Well, that's very fascinating to hear what Clint has been doing at his college there. There's a lot of similar ideas. Again, you can't manage what you don't measure. So we've been trying to first figure out what are our needs. And once we have that understanding, that's where you can align your investments better with the needs. So we've taken the approach of trying to figure out what our breakouts are by system, because some of these systems can be more important than the others. And I know I'm using that term and somebody's going to get upset with me when I say that. But my equation that I've always shared with people is if the roof is leaking and you have water pouring down, guess what? There is not going to be a class, or there is not going to be research happening there. So clearly the roof is going to be more important for me than whether the carpet is ripped. Yes, it is ugly to look at, and yes, I don't want it, or if my walls are not painted, then it may not look as pleasing. All of those do contribute to our student success. But at the end, if literally water is dropping on your head, you're not going to be able to focus on anything. So we're trying to take a stock of what we have in terms of our need. Our backlog is so big that when we sometimes go ask for money, the eyes glaze over because the numbers we're talking about are so big. And we have always used this term deferred maintenance that we are trying to get out of, and starting to use the word building renewal, or making it sound more positive than negative. And to us, that has actually paid off, because very recently, the University of Nebraska agreed to issue $1 billion in bonds over the next 20 years. And the first chunk of that is going to be available now, about $250 million invested in just Lincoln alone. One of the challenges with that is suddenly now you have money. What do you do with that money? And that's where having information like which are my highest priority needs, along with what are the functional uses of those buildings, that brings to forefront what we have. Now, I can keep talking like a facilities manager and keep focusing on HVAC, electrical, and plumbing, but we also are starting to look at our investment priorities and looking forward to the future. We keep talking about people are our most important assets, and a lot of times when we don't have the money, typically that's where we first make some cuts, either not having enough people, not doing professional development for our existing staff, and making sure our work practices align with a total wellness program for our staff. We have seen significant budget reductions in our last 5 years, but even during that time, we made a promise to ourselves that we are not going to pull back on professional development, because that is the way we first demonstrate to our team that we are invested in them. We want to continue to make sure that they can progress in their careers. And secondly, if we are not keeping up with what the changing technologies are out in the world, we will fall behind. So our first and foremost goal is to make sure we invest back in our staff and our teams. The second strategy we are taking is to see if there are ways that we can use innovative technologies. We may not get permanent funding a lot of times, but we do find ways to save one-time money, and taking that one-time money savings, we can reinvest them in innovative technologies that then can reduce our ongoing operational expenses. That becomes a really good tool for us to, in a way, self-fund ourselves. So we've been looking at innovative technologies, any opportunity we get, and then implementing them where there is value. And then in the end, going back to you can't manage what you don't measure, we have to continue to keep assessing our ever-changing buildings that we have on our campus. Sometimes the functionality is changing, but we have to keep up with what their renewal needs are. So it's not a single aspect of investment, taking multiple facets of how we go about it. I think that's what is going to make us all successful.
It's really interesting. I love how broad it is. You're talking about all of those things across that broad range, right? I mean, the investment isn't just a kind of a pure, simple need and money kind of issue, right? It's all of these other factors that fold into that. And I can vouch, Lilette, for your campus, right? You run a very lean operation, but I've not met anybody there that isn't sharp as a tack, right? They're just really good people, and so that training is paying off in terms of your ability to run and operate them. And I know then we're going to talk a little later about some organizational things, and it's a challenge, right? Trying to find the right people in the right places to do those things. Let's move. You mentioned sort of the health and welfare kind of issue as one of the issues there. And I want to move to that third strategy around healthy and smart. Feeling and staying healthy has been at the forefront of everyone's mind over the last 18 months. In fact, one of the new stresses, I think, for anybody trying to downsize a facilities organization under pressure is now everybody thinks custodians are really important in a way that they were always the first ones to be, sort of considered for some sort of reduction in the past. The role that campuses play in contributing that sense of well-being is just, it's critically important to understand because we all have a new awareness of it. Not to mention everybody apparently now knows what a MERV 13 filter is. We all better be able to talk about it. When I was working with Lander on the 2021 State of Facilities, we pretty quickly realized that this intersection of health and tech, it's a very timely topic, and APA has already been committed over the last several years to move the conversation forward because, frankly, campuses aren't in a position individually to do it. You're leading that initiative, Lilette, in terms of exploring how campus leaders can outline more thoughtfully those investments in tech to assure that healthiness, and I guess I'll put that in quotes for right now. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there? There are a couple slides here you wanted me to show about what that group's planning, what they're doing now, what the group's planning to do next.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is actually something very near and dear to my heart. So yeah, 18 months ago when the pandemic first started in March of 2020, people started coming to us and asking us, hey, is my building safe to occupy? And as facilities managers, we would kind of think back in our heads and say, yeah, you know what, sort of, kind of, maybe, mostly. But there was not an easy way to quantify our answer. It was all a qualitative answer. And that's what got our thought process going on this. And we looked at the industry to see if there is a measurable metric out there. And we learned that even though we have WELL, we have LEED, we have other aspects, we do not really have a measurable, quantifiable way to identify how healthy, safe, whatever term you want to attach to that. Even this name is still a work in progress, healthy, smart buildings. So right now, and this is just a working definition, the task force is still wordsmithing this. It is a self-assessment decision-making framework for creating healthy buildings with investment in smart technologies across a campus or real estate portfolio. Now that's a mouthful there. Let me see if I can break it down for you. So first of all, it's a self-assessment. So in this case, we just talked about how our budgets are tight. We are trying to avoid having to create another certification program where you have to hire a consultant, you have to hire a third party that comes in, walks your buildings, and comes up with a scorecard for you on what your current state of your facilities is. We wanted to make sure that you as a facilities manager can take it upon yourself and do a self-assessment. Once the self-assessment is done, we don't want it to just, actually, before I go there, we want to make sure that self-assessment does not take so long that you really need another FTE to be able to accomplish that, because then that beats the purpose. I would rather just go and hire a consultant rather. So we wanted to make it quick enough, but still valuable enough, because the output of that will allow you to make decisions on what you can do with your infrastructure in the building. And if you really think back, odds are that anything that you make, anything that you do for improving to make your building healthier, odds are it's going to actually cost you more, either in one-time upfront cost or on an ongoing cost. For example, MERV 13 is a good topic that you brought up, Pete. MERV 13s are more expensive than probably what you were using on your campuses previously. But it probably is, at least on our campus, we have decided that we are never going to go back to anything less than MERV 13. Some campuses are choosing to go back to what the previous filtration level was in their campus after the pandemic is over, which I hope that it's going to be any day now. Once that decision is made, though, that means my operational costs have gone up. If you look at your ventilation rates, the same thing comes into play, because increasing the ventilation rate will lead to increased energy costs. So the idea behind the smart technologies is that if there are ways that we can use smart technologies to mitigate or eliminate those increased operational costs, then there may be an opportunity for us to invest in those smarter technologies that will mitigate our long-term total cost of ownership. So for example, in that ventilation case, we may be able to install occupancy sensors in our spaces or create scheduling if you don't have it already, which allows you to actually reduce your ventilation when the building is not occupied. So we looked at various research and identified these 10 factors that we have created. We are also calling it foundations. Again, still it's a work in progress right now, where we will take these 10 foundation: ventilation, air quality, thermal comfort, water quality. You can see it on the screen. And we are creating elements of these that will become survey questions for a facility manager per building. And based on how you answer that question, so for example, in ventilation, is your ventilation up to ASHRAE 62.1 for this kind of space you're using? Then you get a certain score. If it exceeds that minimum requirement, then you get a bonus score. If you're unable to, either because of your air handler not able to provide that that kind of air, then you will get a lower score. What this does is it allows you to go back into your scoring and identify the areas because of which the score was lowered, and then you have a choice to make as a facilities manager. This is not a silver bullet to go find new money that may or may not exist, but it is to utilize this information, possibly pair it with your FCA, FCI data, possibly pair it with your other analysis that you may have done, and then use that combined knowledge to make more informed decisions, and then increase your healthy smart score. So that's the basic idea. As far as timeline, we are probably close to finalizing the alpha version of what the framework is going to look like, hopefully over the next month or two before the end of the calendar year. And then come next year, we are looking at probably inviting 30 to 40 various sizes of schools, various Carnegie classifications, to do a pilot with this framework and see if there are ways that we can improve it, or any feedback we can get from them. And then hopefully in spring or summer, release it to the rest of APA membership.
I really appreciate some of the language you were using around, expediency, making sure it's something you can do yourself, that it doesn't, cost you a lot of extra time and people or other sort of consultative costs. And this idea of driving toward decision making, right? I think so often we get so busy collecting data, or we're so busy making lists, we're not actually doing anything with it. And so I think that's a great focus for the committee. And particularly the notion that the group's going to road test it some more, right? I can imagine, Clint, thinking about where you are and the kind of the 6 different campuses and all over the place and the different kind of structure. There's something valuable about this, but it's got to be road tested some places that are very, we know that, you can be as open-minded as you can, but you're at a different kind of campus than Clint is, right? So, excuse me.
Absolutely.
I'll just jump in and say, I to be perfectly honest, I only became aware of this concept, this framework, a couple of weeks ago as we started preparing for this. And I think it's fascinating, and I can't wait to hear what the task force puts out. At our campus, so far our efforts as far as smart and automation have been focused on cost reductions. And, so to that end, it's probably the red circles, the thermal health and the lighting, and, you're going to have a cutback in utilities. But, in hearing the conversation and in thinking about the concepts, probably at all of our campuses, labor and benefits has to be over half of our cost. And so how much money is lost through productivity, meaning sick time, or possibly through people leaving and going elsewhere? What are the cost of poor retention? Those need to be factored in as well as you're trying to make your case to the powers that be during the budget cycle. And I've made notes to do just that. So it's really good stuff. Thank you.
an interesting kind of real-time road test here too, right? Because Olette, you were talking about trying to get this to be something that everybody can understand. And the first place you got to start is in the finance office, right? To kind of make that connection so that as a team, those offices can go out to the rest of the community and talk about priorities. So, I mean, if it's resonating even in this early form with you, Clint, I think that's an excellent sign that the task force is moving in the right direction, which is very, very exciting. Very exciting. I mean, we always want the state of facilities document to be inspirational. Loving the idea we're kind of running concurrent with this idea that's just taking its own life, coming out of Healthy and Smart. Let's keep moving into that final point, final issue. And it kind of ties back to something you both have talked to at different points already. We talk about, sort of people, and the organizations in place today, I think, are realistically probably not the ones you need for the school or the campus tomorrow, right? We know that. How they'll evolve and what that means in terms of new staffing strategies, I think is something, it's a bit of a work in progress. But I want to, again, ask you both to talk a little bit about what you're thinking about the organizations that you have in place right now to care for the campus and what you're starting to do to think about reimagining them, or maybe how you're thinking about them supporting different operational and capital strategies. Again, like what are the kind of pieces there? Clint, maybe we go back to starting with you in that vast area you talked about. I actually did the math at one point. That area you talk about is just slightly smaller than Delaware, Rhode Island, Connecticut together. Like they're just barely, as a group, just larger than that area you're serving. So it's vast. It's vast. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about where you're going with some operational issues?
Sure. So for our school, and I'm sure for all of yours, recurring money is precious, and so positions are precious. So one of the first things we want to do is make sure, are we getting good value for the positions we already have? Are they being productive? The way we've decided to structure ourselves is we have 2 main campuses and 4 centers, but our trades group is really based off of one of our campuses, and from there we dispatch them to the other locations, which makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. But one of the things that we hadn't realized is, why is it taking our guy an hour to change a fan belt on our campus, but it takes him 3 hours on another campus? Well, it's because of the drive time or the windshield time, right? We are pretty spread out, and so with help from some sight lines looking at this, we kind of restructured our work order system to be able to better capture travel time. Turns out about a quarter of our workforce, of our trades workforce, which is one of our most precious groups, is being used on travel time. So it's causing us to rethink about, first of all, we're monitoring the work orders, and if we reach a point where it would be warranted to have some people based at another location based on the amount, the volume of work, happy to do that. In the meantime, rather than dispatching people on a daily basis, we're accumulating work orders and sending people over for the day to try to minimize that downtime. Another thing, I guess I kind of wanted to dovetail in with what Lilith was saying about investing in our people. I think we're all probably experiencing difficulties hiring qualified folks. Personally, I think it might be a little harder at rural locations. We just don't have that massive population to draw from. You have to probably get somebody to relocate from where they're at to join our organization, so it adds a little bit of difficulty. So one of the things that we're doing is we're working like the Dickens to try to better retain our people. We're creating career ladders. We are also trying to maybe work with our own more junior people and develop them into more skilled tradespeople. And so, we're investing in, APA supervisory training. We're investing in our own CTE programs and putting folks through that to help them make that next rung on the ladder.
That's really exciting. I think we're going to have to find those kind of things, right? Everybody's talking about not being able to find people anywhere, and I think it's going to be some homegrown training, some partnering with local peer institutions if you have them in your area, right? That kind of question, depending on the school. But I mean, I think that's a really huge step forward. And gosh, the travel time thing is so complicated, right? Because you don't want someone else isolated by themselves, like the Maytag repairman waiting for something to be repaired on their I'm dating myself with that reference, but on their campus, right? It's a big issue. I find me thinking, Lillette, I wonder to the extent to which technology and some of that healthy, smart stuff you were just talking about might also go in play at some schools, right? Some of this thinking about how to improve performance and how to focus on human performance with some investments might help some of these travel time issues, right? You could sort of not have to have as many people alone by themselves on a smaller site. I don't know. Well, it's something to think about, I guess, in terms of how that committee is developing its recommendations.
Right, that's true.
But Lillette, what about you? You talked before about that investment in people that Clint was just referencing. Does that impact how you put together teams now and going forward? I mean, are the kinds of people you're investing in going to be different, or is that smart building kind of notion going to affect the way in which you develop and train people, do you think, over time?
Oh, absolutely. As you are aware, Pete, because you've been on our campus and you've seen our budgets, our budget has been declining over the last few years. It has stayed flat for the most part, but then over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen some significant reductions in what we are funded for, and that's putting a significant pressure on our staff. The span of control for our team has gone up significantly. So same person is doing a lot more things. Same person is doing more diverse things. And I completely agree with Clint. The career ladders have come in and assisted us in allowing us to create those positions. So we actually added lower rungs on our career ladder, that somebody who has mechanical aptitude, even we live in a very agrarian state here, and we have had actually very good luck hiring farming kids that end up having that mechanical aptitude and providing them that training, because most of the time the work ethic is already there and the mindset is already there. And if we can just give them the skills that they need to grow into whatever profession or skill we want them to, and give them the latitude to make a few mistakes. It's okay to make a few mistakes here and there, because in the end, the mistakes are what's going to teach them the most important lessons, and they're going to learn from that the most. So we are definitely looking at those options. To your point about the changing type of people that we are hiring because of technology changes, you're absolutely right. Back in the day, for example, at our utility plant, most of our staff was either maintenance mechanics or the boiler operators. We have a significant team that does instrumentation and controls. And even the operators are having to learn more about how to use those automated signals from the sensors that they're getting from the chillers and boilers, rather than having to go run over and turn the valve down when you have a downturn on your chiller usage. They're able to now do it right from their screen, but it takes time, it takes training. So we are making sure that while we are implementing technology, we are not leaving our staff behind in terms of their ability to utilize that technology. Otherwise, you're not going to be there. Another example of a technology that has made a position not necessary is we used to have a controls operator that used to monitor and look through all the systems on a daily basis. It may have taken him 3 days to go through the whole campus because of the sensors we have on our campus. And that person retired, and it was so hard to find a way to replace that person because of the knowledge that walked out of the door when they left. And instead of trying to retrain somebody, we moved on to the fault detection and diagnostic type systems that sort of inherently do that, and now are providing that actionable intelligence that our energy engineers and our maintenance staff needs to go fix the problem sometimes, and actually a lot of times before the problem actually becomes a problem. So we are trying to take those early signals of failure and utilize that information to go and take care of the problem before it interrupts our student success or it interrupts our teaching. So those are a few things. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was thinking you're both talking about this great blend of kind of old school, new school, right? I mean, the potential implementation of technologies or other tools to help you know more and see more, and yet more kind of apprenticeship style training, right? Bringing people through the system, trying to encourage people to be around for a while. I know, Clint, at one point, when you and I were talking about the whole idea that people who move to that part of Arizona kind of go there because they want to be there. So if you can find a way to attract them, they're going to want to stay. And I suppose the same thing is true for you, Lillette. I mean, both of you have situations where people, they want to be in those parts of the world. They're not trapped there. They really enjoy it. If you can give them a way to evolve into a new role or take on a new technology, I'm sure they're eager to do it.
Yeah.
Really, really interesting. That kind of, I think, is the culmination of our collective thoughts on all of this. I suppose the question we want to get to is, are there particular things that the two of you would like to make sure that, of all the comments you've made, that there's sort of particular things you want them to hold on to, or things that you think are particularly important? And maybe Clint, let's start with you. What are the kind of the sort of parting wisdom from all of this stuff that's kind of come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think maybe now more than ever, we have to justify why our physical spaces are creating competitive advantage and not just another cost center. You know, prior to the pandemic, realistically, our little school probably had a half dozen competitors. You know, obviously in the last year and a half, that's changed. All 4,000 of us have figured out how to get online. And maybe even of more concern are some of the organizations, the for-profit online schools that you see who have come into the marketplace and are really jumping in at a lower price point and with quicker delivery of a credential leading to a job. You know, let me just highlight one or two. You know, Career Builder partnered with Capella Education to create a new program called Right Skill, and students who aren't placed in a new job within 90 days of completing the online program receive a full refund, which is just amazing. So again, these folks probably don't have the same kind of capital overhead costs that we all do. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to help justify how are our facilities making a difference for our constituents, you know, whether it's the business community that we're serving or our students, how are we adding value? And once we have a real clear picture and we can articulate that, I think it becomes a lot easier to help have successful ask during the budget process.
Right, in that graphic, you got Amazon, and we're hearing about everybody kind of investing in either doing the training themselves or partnering with another, you know, organization like this to try to make that stuff happen. And that's part of that student experience expectation we talked about before too, right? Students want a job. Like, I go to training, I get a job, right? That's not how people were teaching philosophy 200 years ago, but that's how people are going to school today. They you know, I want to become an accountant, or I want to become a marketing guru, or whatever it is. They want that direct result. It was such a big change. And it's not, I don't hear you saying space is not necessary, or we should all be online. You're just saying we need to distinguish what makes that in-person experience valuable.
No, absolutely. You know, you remember part of my story is, you know, we have taken a step away from classrooms as more of our gen eds have gone online, but we've reinvested that money in lab space, which is a lot harder to replicate in a quality fashion online, because we think that's the value added is the hands-on learning opportunities that we can create. And just to jump on something you just said, I do think the pace of career change is different. I mean, I think folks, roughly speaking, our age, you know, might have had half a dozen different careers throughout their lifetime. I think this new generation coming out of school, high school now, they're going to have easily 12, 15. So what are the implications of that for us on our facilities? How do we make them more flexible, more readily changeable at a lower cost point so that we can adjust our programs to match demand?
Yeah, and how do you respond to that evolving future, right, when your plumber is changing every 3 years, right? I mean, we're so used to having knowledge embedded in people's heads, and if it's not the case, that's just going to be really, really frightening. How about you, Lillette? What's sort of come to your parting wisdom?
Well, I completely agree with what Clint said. In the end, it is an important part of the cost of education today is the space and the facilities cost that goes into not just the professor's salary or the support staff, but it is definitely space, and we have to be prepared to justify why that investment is important. One of the recent surveys that students took for UNL when they were coming back from the pandemic was when we were in the hybrid mode, most of the people that did it online did not enjoy their experience. And that word experience keeps coming back, the college experience. We want to go through that college experience. We want to be in class. We want to be in the dorms. We want to be in the libraries. We want to be part of that physical built environment. Now, to Clint's point, yeah, it may not be a classroom anymore. It may be a lab. It may not be a classroom. It may be a learning commons. It may no longer be a library. There's a donut shop now in every library with the learning commons. So it's that changing environment that we are in, and that's why I love this picture that you have of APA's foundations, and at the top they're talking about preparing for every future. Do I know what the future is going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? If I answered yes, I'd be lying because I don't. But the key is not to prepare for a future, but to prepare for every future. And at Nebraska, we have this End 2025 strategic plan where the group that worked on it identified this tagline that I love. Every person and every interaction matters. We live it every day. Every interaction we have with each other, we believe contributes to us. Our senior leadership is very supportive of what we do. In fact, our vice chancellor always, whenever he starts his any presentation, he has this picture of a farm in the middle of nowhere. And that was our first building for University of Nebraska-Lincoln campus. And today we are a 6.5 million square feet campus, academic space. And if you add auxiliary space, we are close to 15 million square feet. And his point with that picture is millions of decisions have been made on a daily, minutely, hourly basis that have led us to where we are today from that picture back in 1800s. So it's that kind of thinking where would you have gone in time and asked somebody when that building was the lone building what the campus would look like in 2021? I doubt that they would have drawn the picture that is our campus today. So that is the key, is we need to be adaptive, we need to be flexible in what we are doing, and we need to be prepared to change directions when it becomes clear that the direction change is needed.
And I love what you guys are encapsulating all of those things, right? We put out there that there are these 4 strategies, but you're knitting it together in this kind of flexibility and this active, right? This active role in trying to figure out where we're going to go in the future and trying to be really intentional about it, so we don't just bump into it and stumble into it. And it's just such a necessity, and we've seen that over and over again to this point. We have unfortunately run up against right about the hour. There were a couple of questions that got answered offline that were more process issues. There was one other question I want to make sure I just called out really quickly. It's a question about campus density. It's talking about averages and asking whether that was what is the average. I think those were database averages, right? Sort of pure averages that would on all of your charts. Was that correct?
Right.
Okay.
So the blue bars were showing our campus density over time, and then there was a solid line showing our peer average.
All right. Well, I just want to say, as we reach the top of the hour, thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for coming and sharing what you're doing, what's happening on your campus. I really appreciate it. I can't say enough about the contributions I know you're both making to your campuses, and we really appreciate you sharing it with the audience who's listening today. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of you who joined us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much to our speakers today. APA wishes to appreciate your participation, and to our attendees, as always, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Until next time, be safe, stay healthy, and be kind to one another. Thank you so much.